You know, this year has been one of the quietest years when it comes to MVP. I feel like in recent memory because we are deep into the season. And have you really heard a lot of talk about the MVP? Usually we be talking about somebody being the MVP like week 3, week 4 of the season. I think there was a large part of the season where I think like the first few weeks where it was Josh Allen's MVP, right? That's who everybody wanted the MVP to be. That's where the energy was going. That's where everybody was like, look at the growth and all this stuff. And then Josh Allen started throwing a bunch of interceptions. And now we are where we at today, where who is the MVP, right? Because right now, if you look at the betting odds, the favorite is Patrick Mahomes. But are they going to give Patrick Mahomes the MVP? Because it feels like at this point, it kind of feels redundant to give him the MVP. And is this the best Patrick Mahomes has looked since it's like, I don't know. I don't think he's a clear MVP right now, right? He's clearly good, but there's been some very questionable games for him. Less questionable games than Josh Allen. Like right now, if we're just looking at this player to player, Josh Allen is nowhere close to Patrick Mahomes on this list when it comes to MVP. Patrick Mahomes has played better, but Josh Allen beat him head to head. But that's one factor into it, right? But then you have two quarterbacks, and look, Jalen Hurts isn't undefeated anymore, but he still is in this conversation. Tua Tagovailoa and Jalen Hurts, who have been putting up incredible numbers, but nobody really believes they're MVP quality quarterbacks. Like people think they might be good. Some people might think they might be really good. Nobody thinks they're MVP candidates. Like nobody legitimately thinks that of Tua. And I know there are people who are overrating Tua and trying to compare him to Patrick Mahomes, but like, come on, man. Like if we're being honest about it, like Tua looks more like Dante Culpepper with Chris Carter and Randy Moss than he looks like Pat Mahomes with Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill. Like when you watch the Dolphins play, you're kind of amazed at everything else around Tua, not necessarily Tua himself. He's the quarterback, so he's going to get a disproportionate amount of credit, but he's not MVP. But he's number 2 right now. Then you have Jalen Hurts, who, again, I don't know how people know how to feel about. Because Jalen Hurts is an interesting case of a dude who was the backup, who was like this freshman phenomenon at Alabama. Tua comes by, the new freshman phenomenon, takes his job. He goes to Oklahoma, and it's this weird thing where every team he's been on has been limited by his limitations as a passer. And it's the similar thing going on with him and the Eagles, where, you know, he's not bad, but he is limited, and then that shows up. And then we have 5th on the list, Lamar Jackson, who I don't think anybody is under the like. Lamar's had a decent season so far. He hasn't been having an MVP season, right? And the problem is, here's the problem for the MVP race right now. For guys like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Patrick Mahomes, who are MVP quality players, who would not be weird to see them be MVP, they're not having seasons that are significantly different to seasons that they had in the past to justify giving them the MVP, right? The standard is much different for MVP when you're already an established player, because we're not comparing you to Tua. We're comparing you to the past great years that you have had as a great player. Some people might not think that's fair, but that's just how this goes, right? Josh Allen is not going to be compared to Tua Tagovailoa. He's going to be compared to other Josh Allen years. Patrick Mahomes, a former MVP, is going to be compared to his former MVP year before he can get another MVP. Lamar Jackson is going to be compared to 2019. He's not going to be compared to other quarterbacks when it comes to how people vote for these awards. So that's the problem with those three. And even Joe Burrow, right? He's not having an especially different season than he's had. I know a lot of Bengals fans. I haven't even heard them go MVP yet. And look, let me tell you something. Bengal fans will do it first. And if they're not doing it, that tells you that they don't think it's been that level for him. It's not been an especially great season for him. But then you have dudes who nobody thinks is MVP level quarterbacks who are up here simply because they're quarterbacks of teams that are really good. Tua, Jalen Hurts, and Kirk Cousins. They're only up there because everybody thinks their teams are really good, right? Tua's up there because everybody feels like the Dolphins are one of the best teams in football. Jalen Hurts is up there because they were undefeated for a while. Kirk Cousins, like should feel disrespected. He should be in that same betting odds as Jalen Hurts and Tua, but he's way below because he's Kirk Cousins, and nobody really like thinks Kirk Cousins is ever going to be for real. Like they don't think that year whatever for Kirk Cousins was. This is like year 10 is going to be the turning point for Kirk Cousins. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, you want to talk about Daunte Culpepper. Like, this ain't even Daunte Culpepper. So you get into this weird spot. I mean, Geno Smith is up there too because he's a good story, but he's more comeback player of the year than he is MVP. So those are the dudes who have the top betting odds. Justin Herbert, I mean, they're having a disappointing season right now in LA. Maybe you can justify Tyreek Hill, and you know that the MVP odds are thrown off whack when Tom Brady's on this list when we've been talking about what a disappointment he's been for the last 6 weeks. I mean, Jimmy Garoppolo on this list, dog. And that's the question I'm asking. Is this finally the year for a non-quarterback to win the MVP? I think it's finally the year. I think it is. If you can't justify Patrick Mahomes getting the MVP because he's not having an especially different season statistically than what he has done in the past, if you cannot justify Tua being the MVP because nobody actually believes he's the best player on the Dolphins, if you can't justify Jalen Hurts because nobody actually believes that Jalen Hurts is the best player on the Eagles, and let me ask that question to people who are going to try to justify Tua Tagovailoa, Jalen Hurts, and Geno Smith. Well, Geno's going to be out of this, and Kirk Cousins as MVP. Let me ask this question to those who are going to try to justify it. Do you think that those are the best players on those teams? I don't. I don't even think it's close, right? Tyreek's the best player on the Miami Dolphins. Jalen Hurts, his best player is A.J. Brown. And Kirk Cousins' best player, the best player on the Dolphins, I mean, not the Dolphins, the Vikings, is Justin Jefferson. Why aren't they up for MVP, right? You can't be most valuable player of the league when you're not even the most valuable player of your team. That's all I'm saying. Like, these are good quarterbacks. They're all fine quarterbacks, but they're really only up there because they're quarterbacks. They're not even the best players on their team. Straight up. So how can they be MVP of the league, right? Geno Smith, you can at least make the argument that he's the best player on the Seahawks, but the Seahawks aren't good enough to justify it. He'll probably win comeback player of the year. But then you get to some of these guys like Justin Jefferson, Derrick Henry. I mean, Nick Chubb will be up there if the Browns were a better football team, but they're not even good enough for that to even be a consideration. And Tyreek Hill. And you can make better MVP arguments for those guys. And I know somebody's going to say, well, the wide receiver, somebody's got to get him the ball. Yeah, they make it really easy for people to get him the ball, though. That's why they're good at wide receiving. You shouldn't get credit over the wide receiver simply because you're the one who throws him the ball. I think if you're making that quarterback's life so easy, it like Tua being number 2 in the MVP rate odds should be the argument for Tyreek Hill to be the MVP this year. It should. I think that's a better argument. I don't think there's a good argument for Tua. I don't think there's a good argument for Jalen Hurts. I don't think there's a good argument for Patrick Mahomes right now. I don't think there's a great argument for Lamar Jackson. And maybe if Josh Allen finishes the season strong, there's going to be a good argument for him. Because that's who everybody wants to be the MVP. Everybody wants Josh Allen to turn this around and then start putting up some incredible numbers so they can give him the MVP. They don't really want to give it to Pat. They really don't want to give it to Lamar. They want to give it to Josh. They're not going to give it to Tua. They're not going to give it to Jalen Hurts. So if Josh Allen does not, and look, I think it's likely that he will win the MVP and turn it around and have a great season and all that. But if he does not have that second half of the season that people are wanting for him to have, I think it's reasonable to say that maybe a wide receiver should win MVP this year. Maybe a different position should win MVP this year. We're so used to giving it to quarterbacks. But usually the quarterback who wins MVP is the one who has the highest QBR. Right now, that's Tua. That's not even Patrick Mahomes. So unless you're going to give Tua the MVP, and you can't really give Tua the MVP because you don't believe Tua is the best player on the Dolphins. You think it's Tyreek Hill. So you should give it to Tyreek Hill because he's the best player on the team that you want to give the dude the MVP to. Like, he is clearly, like, when you look at Tyreek Hill's numbers, he's clearly the best football player in football right now. He is clearly. He has elevated Tua's play dramatically. And again, if you want to try to put Tua in comeback player of the year without getting injured, that's a choice. But, you know, he's going to get a Pro Bowl out of this. He's going to get some accolades. He might get third team all NFL out of this. Like, you know, Tua's life's going to be fine. He's going to get a nice extension. He's going to have a nice, like, don't worry about Tua. If he doesn't win the MVP, he's going to be all right. But it should go to Tyreek Hill. It really should. It really should. If I can't undisputedly, without argument, say that you're the best player on your football team, you should not win the MVP. And again, there are 3 quarterbacks on this list who are that. Like, Josh Allen is clearly that. Lamar Jackson is clearly that. Patrick Mahomes is clearly that. But anybody else where it goes, I don't know if he's the best player on this team, should not be in the MVP discussion just because they're quarterbacks. And those are the people who look like they're going to win MVP right now. And my argument is, give it to the player who's actually the best player on that team. You know what I mean? Give it to Tyreek Hill. Because that's clearly who the MVP is. But that's my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. You have a great day. Have a good night.